Hi, and welcome to the next Agile Marketing Roundtable. Today we're going to be talking about estimating Agile story sizes with Deshay and Anthony. They were members of our very first roundtable, and we had such good discussion that we decided we needed to break down into smaller groups and talk about specific topics so we could do a little bit of a deeper dive. So that's what we're going to work on today. So Deshay and Anthony, thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I wanted to start off by just talking a little bit about estimation as a general idea before we look into what you guys are doing with your teams. So maybe why do you even bother with estimation? I know it can be time consuming and a little tedious, but why do you guys have your teams do it?
Anthony, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I came from the world of software development where I was in a communications role, but with a software development team. And Agile, in particular, the Scrum methodology was fantastic because I watched them as a team prioritize and estimate what they could get accomplished. And because they did it so well, so often for years, they were very good at estimating. You could know the velocity of any given team, and you knew they would hit those marks. It was really, to me, the best introduction of the whole thing because it showed me what planned short chunks of work could do and how helpful that was. And then I brought it over to marketing, and it did not work like it worked for my software development friends. The pain point I had was that where they could plan out work and there really were almost no interruptions to that. It was planned work, dedicated resources. That's all they did. Agile wasn't that way for marketing. And it was my first hiccup to say, well, I'm going to do it. We're going to do Scrum. And the end result was estimating became hard for me because it didn't account for the change of interrupt driven work. And we didn't know how to adapt to that well. So it's taken time with each of the companies I've been with and now here at IntelliMagic, where I have a small team. We've had multiple iterations to get to a place where we're starting to feel comfortable. And that's been 7 months of doing that now. So it's a work in it's Agile, right? It's a work in progress. It's hard because interrupt driven marketing is our norm and planned work is not a notion. Editorial calendars are real, but it's not limited to that.
What about you, Deshay?
So we used to track time, and that was the way that we're an agency. So we used to track time, and that was how we determined how much things would cost for all of our clients. And that just is really tedious. And I mean, I'm probably the worst at it from the whole company, but it just started to be a burden. And, people are spending an hour at the end of the day tracking their time, which didn't seem like the best way to spend time for us or for the client. So we came up with an estimation system that it's based on historical knowledge of how long things take, without having to go in every day and track the actual minutes. So it's kind of based on like up to an hour, up to 2 hours, up to 4 hours, and beyond that, and just to make it an average more or less than as every 15 minutes of us trying to track time and bill the client. That was the initial reason for coming up with an estimation system, and it ties into our point system and some other things too.
Have either of you ever experienced any pushback from your team members who maybe don't like doing the estimation process?
Only every day. Yeah. It's hard because estimation was a notion rather than a solid ideology for us. For example, when we first started, I know what Jeff Sutherland says in Scrum, and so your story sizes are not supposed to be hours, but it was very practical for us to start with a team that had never experienced Agile hours because they knew how to estimate their time, very much like you, Deshay. And so we started down that path. But again, the trouble was not the sizing of hours. We were bad at estimating because we're human. But even though we got better at estimating planned work, you could not estimate the unplanned work. And this is where we ran into trouble. So what we did is we changed from hours to t-shirt sizes, from t-shirt sizes to Fibonacci sequence. And then from Fibonacci sequence, we're now at a place where we're just doing cards. So because we've understood how to groom our work and chunk it up, each card should be about the same size in terms of stories. Now, this is our methodology for accomplishing this because we're only going to estimate the work that's planned, and we're only going to do the things that of the three sequences of due, high value, and weighted shortest job first. We're only going to put the due work in our sprints, which are 1 week now. So we don't try to fill up our entire week, right? We try to do a little bit at a time. And so that very first sprint planning session, we were like, God, we've got maybe half a week's worth of work for all of us. But we knew that, yeah, that was the planned work. We were going to have interrupt-driven work, which it's just the nature of this. And we wanted to see how that went. So we went to estimating cards rather than points per se.
So within each of the cards, you don't have a point allotment anymore. It's just, here's the card, get it done, and then we'll move on to what's next.
That's correct. We count each card has a value. You can put any number you want on it, but we've just chosen to do them as cards. So that's stories. Now you still can have multiple stories per epic, right? But the idea is that we chunk up the work into similar bite-sized chunks, and this is not too different from that idea of when you first sit down in a sprint planning session and you're saying, hey, what's the baseline we're going to establish as our sizing? So this story is 3 points in a Fibonacci sequence, for example. Okay, well, that becomes your small in the t-shirt world. So then you would size relative to it. Well, ours is just relative to the cards. And what it shows us is less about how much time and more about the kind of effort we put forth and what we're getting delivered.
Cool. What about you, Deshay? How's your team doing?
Yeah, I mean, what Anthony's saying is interesting because it's really easy to get caught up in the amount of time something should take. We've been doing Agile only for about 8 months now, so we're still in the points and have talked about going to t-shirt size, but we're still doing the point system right now. And when we do our sprint planning, we have kind of decided that all the implementers get about 30 points a week, and then we go through and prioritize based on client needs and what's an urgency. We really try to keep that week, and anything that comes up, we put it in the backlog. That's how we're operating right now. But what I find is it's kind of interesting I think it would be interesting to move away from that because people do get caught up in those numbers, right? So like if a card has 4 points on it because that's what the billable amount is to the client, but we know it probably would only take 2 hours, then it is a little bit of a disconnect because the person working on it they either can get overwhelmed because they're like, oh my gosh, I have 4 things, or half a day of my day is going to be spent doing this. And the other part is if it has 1 point and it takes an hour and a half, then they feel stressed because they're not doing it as efficiently as possible. So it is a little tricky to get that balance.
And you're bringing up a point that we struggled with too, which is that resource allocation was a trick. So while we do have 3 full-time employees, the reality is we're a small company. Pardon me. So my time can't be 40 hours of just head down doing stuff. It's just not going to be that. And so as a result of that, we don't try to evenly distribute the workload across the team. In other words, I've got a guy, Morgan, who is he's head down getting stuff done, right? He is awesome at cranking things out every week. And we have him on specific types of projects. So he's a specialist. So he's going to get more cards done per week than I will. But he also isn't in the meetings I'm in. He's also not going through the administrative overhead that I go through. So we don't try to make it where it's evenly distributed. We just say based on availability, right? So when we do our metrics at the end, Morgan and Danielle are always going to have more points or cards done than I am. And that's fine because I'm doing stuff they don't have to do. My job is to get crap out of their way. So that takes time. And that's something we've found has been very helpful, is to be honest about it. And it's not a competition. We're looking at the team's overall progress, not any one person anyway. So, which is, an Agile belief.
Yeah. Well, let's jump in then and take a look at some specifics about how you guys are making this work.
All right. Well, I'll go in here with the some screen sizing shots I did about sizing. So we use right now we're using a tool called Lean Kit, and that's what this screenshot is showing. But what it really means is it's just a way to manage stories and epics. So this particular one is a demonstration I built to talk about this, where we have the user story in there, the card type, it's a story, what the tags are associated with it, etc. And then you'll notice the size. So we started this way. We did say we were going to put a number of value in terms of hours. So that was 1 hour when we first started. Later, we went to t-shirt sizes, and that would have been an extra small. And then we went to Fibonacci sequence, and that could have been a 1 or a 3, right? Like it was variable based on the methodology we were using at the time. Now it's all based on a singular card. So it's one per card. And it's just that simple. So if you have 18 cards, you have 18. If you have one card, you have one. So we made that very easy for us. The next thing we did, so I can pop over to that. The next thing I did was we realized that when we first started, this is our very first board, the first week I got here, was to just build out the concept for them and show them what, due dates, high value, and then weighted toward a job first, how to manage the process. So estimation of work, we found out only half the battle. The other half was interrupt driven. There is no baseline, so you have to find out what works for you. And we were really, really bad at estimating our first few sprints. So that's normal, and we got better. So what we've ended up with is planning based on the editorial calendar, and our sizing is based on, again, those cards, how much we think each person can get done. And we use a color code system as well. So the yellow are epics, the blue are stories, and the red are spikes. Spike is a representation for unplanned work that came in after the sprint planning session, but during the sprint. And it's a way for us to visualize how much unplanned work is happening in any given sprint. And it lets us, during our stand-ups, choose if we're going to do that unplanned work during that sprint or push it off to another one. Because just because someone says it's urgent doesn't mean that it's urgent. It just means they want it done. So we prioritize that unplanned work. And then that meant we have to refine our metrics. And then so the last slide here I would show is a way we have of doing this is as I pointed out, Morgan is real heads down, right? He's going to crank through a lot of cards. So his cards, 16. He completed everything he planned. He had one spike in there. It was completed. So he had a total of 17. So his completion was fantastic. His percent of time allocated to spikes in this case was only 6%, whereas if you get onto myself, 56%, or Danielle, 33%. That's unplanned work that when we did the sprint planning didn't count for. However, because we don't try to make our planned cards fill up an entire week's worth of work, we leave margin. And we do that through the on deck, which is our pre-groomed work that's sitting right in front of the ready column. It's pull-based, Kanban-based work. And so rather than being pure Scrum, we're Scrum-Bon. So we can always pull work in if there aren't any spikes. We're never at a lack of something to do. It's marketing. The Lex column is your delta. That's the difference of the planned work excluding spikes, and then any lead generating activity. So of the cards, 11 of his 16 were directly related to lead gen. Ideally, I would like to see that be 100%, but this is our world and we're living in it. So that's how we've learned and gotten to a place where we do it differently than we had done before. And for us, this has been very helpful to change what we measure and what we value. So we value what we measure, therefore we measure what we value, right? And so it's been a very helpful exercise, and we're still in process. So I'll stop sharing. There you go.
I have to say, I love your spike tracking, and I tell people about it all the time because I think it's such a good, like, data-driven metric way to tell people this is how your emergencies are impacting my team's output.
Absolutely.
Instead of just saying you're driving us crazy, please stop.
Well, so I mentioned tagging. So one of the things we do is we have the name of the person who introduced the spike is introduced in the card, right? So we can run a report, and so when we see look at all spikes, I can go, oh, look, 90% of them were my boss. And then I can have an objective conversation with him saying, was all of this really that important? Because here's what we didn't do because we did this for you. Mm-hmm. And it's an objective way for him to say, oh, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have. So again, I try to have those conversations, not just after the fact, but it takes the emotion out of, it alleviates the pain of the emotion is a better way to say that. And so I can have the objective conversation and say, look, this is what's affecting our productivity and our deliverability. Because we're not going to I refuse to have my team work crazy hours. We're just not going to do that. We're going to live a healthy work balance. And so I'm going to protect my team from that. And this is a very objective way to do it. So.
All right, Deshay, you want to show us some of what you guys are doing?
Sure. And before I move into that, Anthony, I really love how you tied it together to lead gen specifically. I mean, I think that, of course, is, I imagine, the marketing department's one of your main goals. And so that's really nice to see that what of all the effort that's being done, how much of it is really going to impact the potential for additional revenue. So I think that's a very clean way of presenting it.
Thanks.
So, yeah. Share here. Okay, so ours is a bit more basic because we're still in the early phases, but this is just how we initially got started, was having what you were mentioning. There's the t-shirt size over here, Anthony, that we don't really use. And then the story point allotment over here. So you can see the definition of a story point is less than an hour of total team effort. And that's something we had to get used to, looking at it like, uploading a blog post for a client might take 5 minutes, but when you look at the back and forth of getting it approved and of adding an image and doing the SEO optimization for different team members, it probably is more like 45 minutes. So that's what we tried to look at, rather than one person, but as a team, how long these items take. So from there, we created a story catalog. It's a very ugly Excel spreadsheet, but it works for us now, and tried to outline everything that we do as an agency and how long each of these take, or how much effort is involved in each of these different deliverables. So if it's more than 1 point, if it's more than 8 points, we move it into an epic, and then add each step underneath it, so that when we pull in this type of deliverable, in this case, onboarding a new client, all of these items get pulled in with it, so we don't skip any steps along the way.
Checklists matter. Good job.
Yes. So that's how we do most of our deliverables. Most all of them are an epic because they're more than 8 points, more than a day's worth of work. SEO strategy is an example. And then we have some that are sort of, they can be pulled in as a flyby, like we like to say. So if we need to do a quick SME interview, that's just a point that could be pulled in. Or there's some in here for strategy, for like having a client meeting that wasn't planned for, or doing an outline for a blog post, which we don't do for all of them, but we might do here and there. So there are some kind of standalones that can be pulled in more ad hoc, similar to the spiking mechanism that you have, but we just pull them in individually into the backlog. We also have some in here, like this, for example, is a strategy for a meeting agenda, and we don't allot points towards it, but we do a card for it. So that helps us when we're looking at the points spent per client, that we wouldn't charge them for that amount. That wouldn't be included in their monthly point allotment of these are the success factors that happened. We don't charge them for some of these admin type things. So then from there, we pull everything into the backlog. This is what this looks like. This is our current ones. You can see some things have been done. Each client has their own backlog, and as requests come in, we will manually put them into the backlog, and then when we do our sprint planning, decide whether they need to be pulled in for that sprint or not. And on occasion, there's something that happens before we get a chance to do sprint planning, but we do create a card for it in the backlog, and then just make sure it's pulled in so we can track that. And then it moves into, from there, this is our view each week of what's happening. So this is kind of from the backlog. Once it's pulled into the sprint, we move to this view, and so you can see per person, what is happening, how many points they have left, what cards still need to be done, and so forth. And there are different reports we run each day just to make sure that we're on track and that things aren't getting held up. Or, if it's day 4 of the sprint and one of our implementers doesn't, looks like they're 20% of the way through, then of course we'd have a conversation about that. And similar to you, not everyone has the same points. You can see up here, we have implementer next to some of our people. And so we'll track it by implementer role of how much each person basically is allotted to work on, what their capacity is each sprint. You can see myself, Chris, who's our business development person, and Debbie, our co-founder. We don't have implementer roles, so we don't really look at ours because it's not like a full workload, similar to what you're saying. But Jennifer or Monica or Justin, who are our developers, like content developers type roles, then they have the nose to the grind type of thing, and we have a certain amount of points that they would be pulling through each week. And I will stop sharing as well. Any questions on that?
That's fantastic. I love that you've got such a robust you've got a history that's enabled you to know about what it's going to take to do that kind of planned work. So it's easy to estimate in that regard. How do you then plan for the unplanned work? What happens when you have those and it doesn't fit your matrix there?
We plan with all of our clients a month in advance. So they're kind of used to that, knowing that, hey, this is your time to figure out what you want this month. And most of them are pretty good. And if there is something that comes up, the conversation is either, sure, we can do that for you, but we'll need to take X, Y, and Z out because that's not what your budget is for this month. Or sure, we can do it for you. It's going to cost this much more. As you know, we work on a weekly cycle, and so we'll get it to you next Tuesday or whatever that looks like. I would say this year, we've probably had 3 times where it's been a emergency situation, meaning, emergency for marketing, right? It's not like we're going into surgery, but they needed a press release done and a web page up in 24 hours. And we charged them a rush fee. So it was a very clear, this is not how we operate. We are happy to do it for you, but we're pushing some other things out of the way, and here's your rush fee. It wasn't a lot. It's more of just don't do this all the time.
Make it just a little bit painful for them.
Exactly.
Well, I think that is all I specifically wanted us to cover. Is there anything else you guys want to share with people if they are maybe thinking about abandoning the practice of estimation?
Well, if you abandon estimation, you abandon Agile, right? I mean, you have to estimate your work. Otherwise, go waterfall, right? And just hope for the best. I mean, hope's just a very poor strategy. So I don't think you can abandon it. What we've done is tweaked it. And we've just had a realistic viewpoint of pragmatically saying, look, there's interrupt-driven work, or in your case, Deshay, with the clients. Yeah, I mean, I love yours. Yours is cleaner cut in that, no problem. That'll only cost you this much more. And we're not doing this while you're doing that. I would love to be able to say that internally, to another team member. Sorry, we're not going to do that. But if you pay us this much, that would be great. And maybe we should do that. But anyway,
maybe you can charge them in nice coffee and donuts and such.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, Anthony. I think the estimation, it's kind of start somewhere, and it's not going to be perfect ever. I mean, we do still tweak the catalog a tad, but then we run into, this client already knows our story catalog, and we can't change it on them every month. So we're trying to figure out which version, if we're going to have a version in the contract of this client gets version 1 of the story catalog, and everyone knows to refer to that, and then that can get complicated too. So I think as long as you go into it knowing that it's not perfect, and it is part of Agile. It's doing the best you can to have some sort of system in place and knowing that it'll change.
Very cool. Well, Anthony, do you mind flashing up the slide with my contact email on there? So anybody
Absolutely.
who is listening / watching this later on, if you have ideas that you want to share with the larger Agile marketing community, we would love to hear from you. There's me. That's my email address, editor@theagilemarketer.net. Please get in touch, and we would love to have you on our next roundtable. And thank you again, Deshay and Anthony, for being here today.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
All right, and we're out.